Tonight, the world grows quiet. The noise of the day fades, and the old stories begin to breathe again. Welcome to Narrative Nights, a place where ancient myths are not told in haste, but allowed to unfold slowly, like dreams remembered in the dark. Here we walk beside forgotten gods, cross mist-covered shores, and listen to the wisdom carried through time, softly, gently, without urgency. There is nothing you need to learn, nothing you need to follow. Only listen. Let your thoughts grow still, let your breathing slow, and allow the story to carry you between waking and sleep. Now, the fire burns low, the night deepens, and the story begins. In Irish folklore, there was a strange and unsettling belief that time did not move the same way in every place. In the human world, a single night passed quietly into morning. The fire burned low, the moon crossed the sky, and dawn came as it always had. But beyond the ordinary world, beneath the green hills, behind the mist, and within certain hidden places, there was said to be another realm entirely. A realm of music, feasting, beauty, and stillness. A realm where time itself no longer obeyed human rules. In the old stories, a person might wander into that fairy world for what felt like only a few hours. A single evening of dancing, conversation, or moonlit wandering, and return to find that years had passed in the world they had left behind. The house would be older, the fields would be changed. The loved ones they expected to find might already be gone, and the one who returned was often never quite the same again. Tonight, we'll wander into that haunting old belief, the belief that time flowed differently in the Irish Otherworld, and that one brief step beyond the veil could cost far more than a single night. We'll explore the fairy hills and hidden thresholds where the ordinary world seemed to thin, the stories of those who vanished into places of music and beauty, and the sorrowful mystery of returning home too late to a life that has already moved on without you. So settle in, and let the old Irish imagination carry you gently into the twilight places between 1 hour and the next, where the fairies were said to dwell, and where time was never truly safe. If you enjoy quiet Irish folklore and mythology for sleep, subscribe and settle in for tonight's story. And so, having stepped into the old and unsettling idea, we can begin with the belief at its heart. In Irish folklore, one of the strangest dangers of the otherworld was not always violence, or curses, or open malice. It was time itself. A person might leave the human world for what felt like only a little while, a single evening perhaps, or the passing of a few quiet hours, and return to find that years had gone by in their absence. That is the sorrowful shape of fairy time. A traveller might hear music in the distance, follow it toward a hill, a misted path, or some hidden place at the edge of ordinary life, and step into a realm of beauty and stillness. There, nothing would seem hurried, nothing would seem lost. The night might feel endless, but in a gentle way, as though time had softened rather than broken. And yet, on returning home, the traveller would discover that the world they had left had continued without them. The house would be older, the fields would be changed, the people they had hoped to see again might already be gone. This is what made the idea so haunting. The danger did not announce itself as danger. The otherworld was often imagined as beautiful, welcoming, even peaceful. It was a place of music, feasting, brightness, and youth. If it had appeared hideous, few would have entered it. But in the old stories, its danger was bound tightly to its beauty. It offered relief from the ordinary world, and only later revealed the cost. That cost was not always death. Often it was return. Many old tales contain threats that are easy to recognise: storms, illness, hunger, enemies, harsh winters, unlucky roads after dark. Fairy time belonged to a different kind of fear. It was the fear of stepping away for a moment and coming back too late. The fear that what seemed like a brief absence had become an unbridgeable distance. The fear that home, which had felt so certain, might no longer be waiting in the form one remembered. In that sense, fairy time is more than a magical idea. It speaks to something deeply human. Even now, stripped of fairy hills and moonlit music, the feeling is still familiar. Life moves on while the heart lingers elsewhere. People return after long absences to places that have changed. Memory keeps a world alive within us long after time has altered it beyond recognition. The old folklore gives this feeling a supernatural form, but the sorrow inside it is recognisably human. That may be one reason the idea endured so strongly in Irish tradition. It joined wonder to loss in a way few story motifs can. The otherworld was not merely dangerous, and it was not merely beautiful. It was both at once. It shimmered with invitation, but behind that invitation lay a harsh truth. Mortals belong to time, even when they briefly wander beyond it. To older listeners, this would not have felt like a purely abstract fantasy. In much of Irish folklore, the world was never entirely empty or closed. Certain hills, ring forts, lakes, old paths, and lonely places at dusk seemed to stand near another order of reality. A place could be ordinary by daylight and deeply uncertain by night. A silence could carry meaning. A strain of music heard where no musician stood might be more than sound. Within that kind of imagination, fairy time did not need to be explained like a puzzle. It only needed to be accepted as part of the otherworld's nature. Where the fairies dwelt, human rules weakened. Time itself could no longer be trusted. The stories vary, but their pattern is often much the same. Someone enters, someone lingers, someone forgets the ordinary world for what feels like only a little while, and then comes the return. Return is the true wound in these tales. Without return there is mystery. With return there is grief. The traveller comes back carrying the memory of a place untouched by decay, only to find decay everywhere else. Familiar roads no longer feel familiar. Houses have passed into other hands. Names once spoken with love belong now to the dead. The one who returns has crossed back into the human world, but cannot fully rejoin it. They have seen a place outside ordinary life, and in doing so they have lost their place within ordinary time. That is why fairy time feels so quietly devastating. It does not destroy with noise. It does not rush in with terror. It works gently, almost tenderly, and only reveals its cruelty at the end. The traveller does not understand the loss while it is happening. By the time the truth becomes clear, nothing can be restored. And from that sorrow, much else in Irish folklore begins to make sense. The warnings about certain places, the caution around twilight and night wandering, the unease surrounding music heard from nowhere, the respect shown to fairy hills and old earthworks. All of these belong in one way or another to the same deeper feeling, that the world is not made only of what is visible, and that not every path returns a person unchanged. So before we go further, before we reach the hidden thresholds, the fairy hills, the stories of the invitation and enchantment, and the famous sorrow of those who came home too late, it is worth lingering here for a moment with the idea itself. Somewhere beside the human world, the old stories say, there was a realm where beauty and danger could wear the same face. A realm where one night might not remain one night. A realm where the traveller thinking only a few hours had passed might return to find that the years had quietly gone on without them. and once that had happened, no music, no wonder, and no longing could ever give those years back. From that belief, the rest of the journey unfolds. And so, with that first understanding now settled before us, we can move more deeply into the nature of the place where such a thing was thought possible. The Irish Otherworld itself, close to the human world, yet never bound by its familiar hours. And so, with that first belief now settled in place, we can move closer to the world that made such a belief possible. If fairy time was the wound, then the Irish Otherworld was the place from which that wound emerged. In Irish tradition, the Otherworld was not simply a distant kingdom in the way a foreign land might be distant. It was often imagined as near at hand, hidden behind the visible world, or folded quietly within it. It could lie beneath a hill, across the sea, beyond a lake, within a mound, or behind a veil so thin that the right hour, the right weather, or the right misstep might bring a person close to crossing it. This nearness matters. The Otherworld was not powerful because it was far away. It was powerful because it was close. It existed beside ordinary life, almost touching it. And yet it was not governed by ordinary life at all. That is why it could feel both familiar and deeply unsettling. A person did not need to climb a sacred mountain or travel to the edge of the earth to encounter it. They might come upon it while walking a known path at dusk. They might hear its music across a field. They might pass by a grassy hill 100 times without event, and then, one evening, feel that the place had changed without changing at all. The Irish Otherworld was many things in story, but it was rarely empty. It was a place of presence, a place of brightness, feast, music, youth, beauty, and abundance. In some tales it appears almost like an idealized court. In others, a hidden land untouched by grief or decay. In still others, it feels less like a country than a condition of being, a realm where mortality has loosened its hold and the ordinary burdens of hunger, labour, age, and time no longer press upon the body in the usual way. That is why the Otherworld could not simply be treated as another location on a map. It was different in kind. A valley in the human world remained subject to weather, harvest, and history. A house in the human world aged with its people. A road in the human world gathered footprints, seasons, and memory. But the Otherworld seemed to stand outside that slow wearing down. It was often imagined as a place where beauty remained at its height. Youth stayed youthful. Music did not end. Feast did not empty. Light did not fade in the same weary way. And because of that, time there could not be trusted to resemble time here. If this is one of the quiet rules beneath many Irish tales of the unseen world, the Otherworld does not merely contain marvels, it obeys another rhythm. Human beings may enter it, but they do not enter on equal terms. They bring with them mortal expectations into a realm that does not honour mortal measures. That mismatch is what gives fairy time its force. The traveller assumes that an hour is an hour. The Otherworld does not agree. In older Irish imagination, this realm also carried a strange doubleness. It could be serene, and it could be perilous. It could offer delight, and it could bring sorrow. It was not evil in a simple sense. That is too narrow a word. The Otherworld was often lovely, but it was lovely in a way that could unmake the human sense of proportion. It offered too much beauty, too much ease, too much stillness. It did not strike like a weapon. It loosened the soul's hold on ordinary life. That is why so many tales describe it in alluring terms. A shining company, a radiant woman, a hall of music, a green land beyond the waves, a hidden dwelling beneath the hill, a place where no one seems hurried, burdened, or old. These are not images meant to repel. They are meant to tempt. The listener must understand why someone would follow, why someone would linger, why someone might forget the cold world above for what feels like only a little while. And yet the old stories remain careful. They do not allow that beauty to become harmless. The very things that make the other world desirable are the things that make it dangerous to mortals. It is too full, too bright, too untouched by decline. Human beings are shaped by endings. We live by the clock of the body, the season, the household, the harvest, the grave. A realm with no proper place for those endings may seem merciful at first, but it is not a realm in which human life can remain fully itself. This is why the Irish Otherworld often feels less like an escape than a test of belonging. A person may enter it. A person may even be welcomed there, but that does not mean they can live there without consequence. To pass into such a realm is to step outside the web that binds a mortal life together. Family, duty, memory, labour, custom, return. All of these belong to time. Once time loosens, the rest begin to loosen with it. That is why the traveller who comes back from the other world often finds not only that years have passed, but that the very threads of belonging have frayed beyond repair. The realm itself has not deceived them in the crude sense. It has only remained true to its own nature. It is the traveller who mistook beauty for safety, nearness for familiarity, welcome for permission to stay. There is also something important in the way Irish tradition places this world so close to the land itself. The other world is not always imagined as a remote heaven. It often clings to the landscape. Hills, mounds, waters, and old earthworks carry its presence. That closeness gives the folklore its peculiar intimacy. The unseen is not sealed off. It lives among hedges, roads, fields, shorelines, and green rises in the earth. The marvellous does not wait in some unreachable distance. It brushes the ordinary world from just beside it. Because of this, the Irish landscape in story is never entirely passive. It watches, or it holds memory. It conceals thresholds. A hill may be a hill, and yet more than a hill. A mound may be only earth, and yet not only earth. A lake may shine like any other lake under moonlight, and yet seem to rest upon a depth no boat could sound. The world remains itself, but acquires another layer, one not visible at all times and not open to everyone. That hidden layer is where the other world breathes, and because it breathes so near the human world, the crossing between the two does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it happens with alarming softness. A door opens. Music is heard. A path is followed. A mist thickens. A rider is invited onward. There is often no thunder, no blazing sign, no great tearing of the heavens. The threshold may be crossed almost without noticing. That subtlety is part of the fear. One does not always know when one has stepped beyond the point where human time still rules. This is also why twilight, dusk, and certain lonely hours matter so much in the old imagination. The other world belongs to edges. It is near when categories blur. Day gives way to night. Land meets water. The known path enters a silent place. The traveller is tired, alone, or distracted. At such moments, the visible world seems less fixed. The boundary between the human and the hidden grows thinner. And where the boundary thins, the other world draws close. To the modern mind, this may seem symbolic. In many ways, it is. But folklore does not divide symbol and belief as neatly as modern analysis often does. A person did not need to frame the other world as a system of doctrine in order to feel its nearness. It was enough to know that some places required care, some moments carried risk, some invitations should not be accepted too quickly. The unseen world did not have to be mapped completely in order to shape behaviour. Its reality lived in caution, habit, memory, and story. And underlying all of it was this conviction: where the other world touched the human world, ordinary measures weakened. That includes the measure of time. For that reason, the Irish Otherworld must be understood not only as beautiful, but as fundamentally out of step with mortal life. It is a realm of altered rhythm, a realm that seems full of permanence and yet leaves mortals with irreparable loss. A realm near enough to enter, but not near enough to survive unchanged. That is what makes it so haunting. It is not merely hidden, it is adjacent, not merely magical, but misaligned with the human order. And once that misalignment begins, even gently, the traveller may already be too far within it to turn back in time. So now that the nature of this realm has come a little more clearly into view, we can move nearer still, not yet to the stories of music and invitation, but to the places themselves, the earthly sites where people most often felt the hidden world pressing close, and where the border between one realm and the next seemed thinnest of all. And so, with that first belief now settled in place, we can move closer to the world that made such a belief possible. If fairy time was the wound, then the Irish Otherworld was the place from which that wound emerged. In Irish tradition, the Otherworld was not simply a distant kingdom in the way a foreign land might be distant. It was often imagined as near at hand, hidden behind the visible world, or folded quietly within it. It could lie beneath a hill, across the sea, beyond a lake, within a mound, or behind a veil so thin that the right hour, the right weather, or the right misstep might bring a person close to crossing it. This nearness matters. The Otherworld was not powerful because it was far away. It was powerful because it was close. It existed beside ordinary life, almost touching it. And yet it was not governed by ordinary life at all. That is why it could feel both familiar and deeply unsettling. A person did not need to climb a sacred mountain or travel to the edge of the earth to encounter it. They might come upon it while walking a known path at dusk. They might hear its music across a field. They might pass by a grassy hill 100 times without event, and then, one evening, feel that the place had changed without changing at all. The Irish Otherworld was many things in story, but it was rarely empty. It was a place of presence, a place of brightness, feast, music, youth, beauty, and abundance. In some tales it appears almost like an idealized court. In others, a hidden land untouched by grief or decay. In still others, it feels less like a country than a condition of being, a realm where mortality has loosened its hold and the ordinary burdens of hunger, labour, age, and time no longer press upon the body in the usual way. That is why the Otherworld could not simply be treated as another location on a map. It was different in kind. A valley in the human world remained subject to weather, harvest, and history. A house in the human world aged with its people. A road in the human world gathered footprints, seasons, and memory. But the Otherworld seemed to stand outside that slow wearing down. It was often imagined as a place where beauty remained at its height. Youth stayed youthful. Music did not end. Feast did not empty. Light did not fade in the same weary way. And because of that, time there could not be trusted to resemble time here. If this is one of the quiet rules beneath many Irish tales of the unseen world, the Otherworld does not merely contain marvels, it obeys another rhythm. Human beings may enter it, but they do not enter on equal terms. They bring with them mortal expectations into a realm that does not honour mortal measures. That mismatch is what gives fairy time its force. The traveller assumes that an hour is an hour. The Otherworld does not agree. In older Irish imagination, this realm also carried a strange doubleness. It could be serene, and it could be perilous. It could offer delight, and it could bring sorrow. It was not evil in a simple sense. That is too narrow a word. The other world was often lovely, but it was lovely in a way that could unmake the human sense of proportion. It offered too much beauty, too much ease, too much stillness. It did not strike like a weapon. It loosened the soul's hold on ordinary life. That is why so many tales describe it in alluring terms. A shining company, a radiant woman, a hall of music, a green land beyond the waves, a hidden dwelling beneath the hill, a place where no one seems hurried, burdened, or old. These are not images meant to repel, they are meant to tempt. The listener must understand why someone would follow, why someone would linger, why someone might forget the cold world above for what feels like only a little while. And yet the old stories remain careful. They do not allow that beauty to become harmless. The very things that make the other world desirable are the things that make it dangerous to mortals. It is too full, too bright, too untouched by decline. Human beings are shaped by endings. We live by the clock of the body, the season, the household, the harvest, the grave. A realm with no proper place for those endings may seem merciful at first, but it is not a realm in which human life can remain fully itself. This is why the Irish Otherworld often feels less like an escape than a test of belonging. A person may enter it. A person may even be welcomed there, but that does not mean they can live there without consequence. To pass into such a realm is to step outside the web that binds a mortal life together. Family, duty, memory, labour, custom, return. All of these belong to time. Once time loosens, the rest begin to loosen with it. That is why the traveller who comes back from the other world often finds not only that years have passed, but that the very threads of belonging have frayed beyond repair. The realm itself has not deceived them in the crude sense. It has only remained true to its own nature. It is the traveller who mistook beauty for safety, nearness for familiarity, welcome for permission to stay. There is also something important in the way Irish tradition places this world so close to the land itself. The other world is not always imagined as a remote heaven. It often clings to the landscape. Hills, mounds, waters, and old earthworks carry its presence. That closeness gives the folklore its peculiar intimacy. The unseen is not sealed off. It lives among hedges, roads, fields, shorelines, and green rises in the earth. The marvellous does not wait in some unreachable distance. It brushes the ordinary world from just beside it. Because of this, the Irish landscape in story is never entirely passive. It watches, or it holds memory. It conceals thresholds. A hill may be a hill, and yet more than a hill. A mound may be only earth, and yet not only earth. A lake may shine like any other lake under moonlight, and yet seem to rest upon a depth no boat could sound. The world remains itself, but acquires another layer, one not visible at all times and not open to everyone. That hidden layer is where the other world breathes, and because it breathes so near the human world, the crossing between the two does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it happens with alarming softness. A door opens. Music is heard. A path is followed. A mist thickens. A rider is invited onward. There is often no thunder, no blazing sign, no great tearing of the heavens. The threshold may be crossed almost without noticing. That subtlety is part of the fear. One does not always know when one has stepped beyond the point where human time still rules. This is also why twilight, dusk, and certain lonely hours matter so much in the old imagination. The other world belongs to edges. It is near when categories blur. Day gives way to night. Land meets water. The known path enters a silent place. The traveller is tired, alone, or distracted. At such moments, the visible world seems less fixed. The boundary between the human and the hidden grows thinner. And where the boundary thins, the other world draws close. To the modern mind, this may seem symbolic. In many ways, it is. But folklore does not divide symbol and belief as neatly as modern analysis often does. A person did not need to frame the other world as a system of doctrine in order to feel its nearness. It was enough to know that some places required care, some moments carried risk, some invitations should not be accepted too quickly. The unseen world did not have to be mapped completely in order to shape behaviour. Its reality lived in caution, habit, memory, and story. And underlying all of it was this conviction: where the other world touched the human world, ordinary measures weakened. That includes the measure of time. For that reason, the Irish Otherworld must be understood not only as beautiful, but as fundamentally out of step with mortal life. It is a realm of altered rhythm, a realm that seems full of permanence and yet leaves mortals with irreparable loss. A realm near enough to enter, but not near enough to survive unchanged. That is what makes it so haunting. It is not merely hidden, it is adjacent, not merely magical, but misaligned with the human order. And once that misalignment begins, even gently, the traveller may already be too far within it to turn back in time. So now that the nature of this realm has come a little more clearly into view, we can move nearer still, not yet to the stories of music and invitation, but to the places themselves, the earthly sites where people most often felt the hidden world pressing close, and where the border between one realm and the next seemed thinnest of all. And so, now that the Irish Otherworld has begun to take shape as a realm beside the human one, we can move toward the places where that hidden nearness was most strongly felt. For in Irish folklore, the border between worlds was not imagined as lying everywhere equally. Some places were ordinary, others were not. Or rather, some places seemed ordinary until the wrong hour, the wrong weather, or the wrong step revealed that they were not ordinary at all. This is one of the most important features of the old imagination. The hidden world did not float abstractly above the land. It pressed against particular parts of it. Certain places seemed thinner than others, as though the fabric of ordinary life had worn fine there, and something older, stranger, and less human lay just beneath. These were threshold places, places where the worlds grew thin. Among the most powerful of these were the green hills and mounds so often linked with the fairies. In Irish tradition, such places were not merely raised ground. They carried presence. A grassy rise might appear quiet and harmless by day, but its shape, its age, or its strange stillness could mark it as a place to be respected. In later folklore, ring forts and earthworks were often treated in much the same way. Even when their original builders had long been forgotten, they remained set apart in the imagination. They seemed to belong partly to history and partly to something that stood outside history. That doubleness mattered. A person looking at such a place could feel that it belonged to the land and yet not fully to human use. It was there, visible, solid, and yet somehow withheld. This is why so many old stories place fairy encounters near mounds, forts, and hills. These places carried the suggestion of enclosure, hidden life, and inwardness. Something might be within. Something might be beneath. A door might exist there, though not always visible. Music might issue from it. Light might appear where no fire had been kindled. The hill was more than landscape. It was a surface, and under that surface, the imagination felt another country breathing. Nor were hills the only such places. Water, too, was deeply bound to the unseen. Lakes, springs, wells, rivers, and shorelines often stood at the edge of the marvellous. Water changes what it reflects. It blurs outlines. It conceals depth. It catches light in ways that make the familiar seem uncertain. In many traditions, not only Irish ones, water marks transition. But in Irish folklore especially, certain lakes and western seas seem to open toward realms beyond the ordinary world. A shining expanse under moonlight is never only an expanse. It suggests passage. It suggests distance of a different kind. It suggests that the visible horizon may not be the true boundary at all. Islands carried a similar power. Separated from the mainland, reached only by crossing water, they already belong to a logic of removal. An island can feel close enough to see and yet difficult to enter. It stands apart. In story, such separation easily becomes sacred or uncanny. The farther west one imagines it, the stronger the feeling grows. Beyond the ordinary shore lies another shore. Beyond the known island, another kind of country. The other world does not need to be placed in the heavens if it can be placed across a stretch of shining sea. There are also roads and paths. This matters more than it may first appear. A path is a line of movement. It joins one place to another. But in folklore, not all paths belong wholly to human traffic. Some are older than the roads people believe themselves to have made. Some seem to pass through the land with a purpose not entirely human. In Irish tradition, fairy paths and fairy roads are remembered with particular caution. To obstruct them was dangerous. To cross them carelessly could invite trouble. They suggest that the unseen world too has its movements, its routes, its customs of passage. This makes the landscape feel inhabited in a deeper way, not only full of visible life but crossed by invisible intention. And where such intention moves, time may no longer belong entirely to human keeping. Crossroads too belong to this world of uncertainty. A crossroads is already a place of decision, pause, and direction. It is where one road ceases to be enough. One must choose. In many folk traditions, such places gather unease because they gather possibility. They are transitional by nature. One is neither fully here nor there, and anything transitional can become, in story, a likely site for the hidden world to draw near. Then there are the lonely places that are harder to name exactly. A field at dusk, a bend in the road where the hedges grow too still, a hollow where mist gathers, a ruin half swallowed by grass, a shore where no one else walks after dark. These may not carry formal names in every tale, but they carry the same atmosphere. They're places where the ordinary world seems to hesitate, places where sound travels oddly, places where a person feels watched, not in the sharp sense of danger, but in the softer and often more unsettling sense of entering a presence not meant for them. This is part of what gives Irish landscape folklore its enduring power. It does not rely only on grand spectacles. It knows the strange force of small shifts. A silence where there should be birdsong. A melody on the wind where no player stands. A light in a place where no house should be. The world remains almost normal. Almost. And that narrow gap between almost and fully becomes the space where the other world enters. The times of day associated with such places matter as well. Midday is rarely the hour of crossing. Bright. A busy afternoon belongs too fully to ordinary labour and human certainty. But dusk is different. Night is different. Fog is different. In these hours the edges of things soften. Distance becomes harder to judge. Familiar places loosen their outlines. A hill no longer looks quite like the hill known in daylight. A body of water widens into something more mysterious. A path through a field becomes uncertain before it becomes invisible. The old imagination recognized this. The hidden world was not merely located in certain places, but approached through certain conditions. Twilight, darkness, silence, and weather all helped thin the boundary. This is why older warnings often sound practical on the surface and deeper underneath. Do not wander there after dark. Do not linger by that mound. Do not follow music from the hill. And do not cross that place at certain hours. Such warnings are not only about physical danger, though physical danger may of course be present. They are about the instability of a world that does not remain the same at all times. A safe place in daylight may not be safe at night. A harmless rise in the earth may become, after sunset, a threshold. And threshold is the right word. For these places are neither wholly one thing nor wholly another. They stand between known and unknown, human and hidden, this world and the next. That in-between quality is what gives them their charge. A fairy hill is not merely where the other world is hidden. It is where the relationship between the worlds becomes possible. A lake is not only mysterious because it is deep, it is mysterious because it suggests passage. A path is dangerous not only because one may get lost upon it, but because it may carry one farther than intended in more than a physical sense. The old stories often preserve this feeling without explaining it too heavily. A traveller comes to a place and feels compelled to stop. A rider notices music where there should be none. A passerby sees a brightness at the hill. Someone strays from the road and cannot quite say where the familiar world ended. These are not mechanical transitions. They are atmospheric ones. The world turns slightly. That is enough. And because the turning is slight, the danger can go unnoticed until it is too late. A threshold does not always announce itself. Sometimes it invites, sometimes it only waits. This too helps explain why so many of these places were treated with respect in ordinary life. Even people who would not have spoken grandly of another realm might still avoid disturbing a certain mound. They might not cut a lone hawthorn standing in the wrong place. They might leave a path unobstructed. They might pass a particular spot with a little more care after nightfall. Folklore often works this way. It does not require perfect agreement on doctrine. It settles into habits of caution, little courtesies toward the land, small refusals to interfere where interference feels unwise. That lived caution gives the stories weight. The threshold places were not merely imagined in tales, they shaped behaviour. And behind that behaviour lay a simple understanding. Some parts of the landscape were not fully ours, not because human beings could not walk there, but because walking there did not guarantee remaining wholly within the human world. That is the deeper meaning of these thin places. They remind us that in Irish folklore, the land is never just scenery. It is active, layered, and remembering. It keeps openings within it. It does not reveal them equally to everyone, but it keeps them. And where such openings exist, time itself may begin to loosen. For once a person has crossed where the worlds grow thin, the next danger is not always visible in the place itself. It may come in what follows, the sound that draws them farther, the brightness that invites them onward, the company that makes them forget the hour. So now that the threshold places have come into view, the hills, waters, paths, and lonely edges where the unseen world pressed closest to the land, we can go a little farther, toward the lures that so often carried travellers across those borders without resistance. Music, light, welcome, and the irresistible invitation in. And so, having seen how the hidden world invited the traveller inward, we can now come to the more subtle danger that followed. For once the music was heard, once the threshold was crossed, and once the welcome was accepted, another change began to take hold. The traveller started to lose the hour. This is the quiet centre of fairy time. Not simply that time moved differently in the other world, but that the person inside it often did not notice. This strangeness was not always felt at once. There was no great clock striking in warning, no voice announcing the cost. Instead, the ordinary sense of passing time began to soften, then blur, then slip away altogether. That is what made enchantment so dangerous. It altered perception before it revealed consequence. In the human world, time is marked constantly. Even when we do not think about it, light changes, hunger rises, weariness gathers, shadows lengthen, sounds fade from the fields. The body itself keeps count. A person knows, even without a clock, when evening deepens into night and night moves toward morning. Ordinary life is full of these small measures. They bind the day together. They guide return. They tell us when to leave, when to rest, when not to linger. But in the old stories of the other world, those measures begin to fail. The light does not dim as expected. The music does not tire. The feast does not end. The body does not protest. The traveller feels no urgency. And without urgency, time loses one of its strongest human meanings. This is why enchantment in Irish folklore is so often linked with ease. The traveller is not only delighted, the traveller is relieved. So no hunger presses, no cold intrudes, no duty calls sharply enough to break the spell. What would normally pull a person back toward home, an hour grows strangely quiet. The mind ceases to count, the body ceases to insist, and in that stillness, one of the oldest safeguards of mortal life disappears, the need to remember time. This forgetting is rarely portrayed as stupidity. The traveller is not foolish in a simple sense. Rather, they are under the influence of a realm that does not honour the same signals that govern mortal life. They have entered a place where continuity feels unbroken, where pleasure flows without interruption, where one moment resembles the next so perfectly that the boundary between them begins to dissolve. That kind of experience is difficult to resist. It is also difficult to measure. In many fairy tales and legends, the traveller remains in the hidden world because nothing inside that world feels incomplete. There is no obvious ending point, no clear sign that the night has gone too far. A feast in human life ends when candles gutter, plates empty, guests weary, or dawn intrudes. But what happens when the candles do not gutter, the music does not falter, the company does not fade, and dawn never seems to arrive in the expected way? The answer, in folklore, is simple and devastating. The traveller stays, and because they stay, they lose more than they understand. There is something important here about the texture of fairy time. It does not always rush. It suspends. It creates the feeling that there is still time, that there will be time, that departure can happen later, and later, in such a place, becomes a dangerous word. Later means not now. Later means one more song, one more conversation, one more turn through the hall, one more moment before returning. But when later belongs to a realm outside mortal time, later can swallow years. This is part of what makes the motif so haunting. The loss is not usually dramatic while it is taking place. The traveller may feel peaceful. They may even feel more fully alive than before. The sorrow comes afterward, when ordinary time reasserts itself all at once, and the true scale of the absence becomes clear. In this sense, enchantment in Irish folklore is not only about delight, it is about disorientation. It unties the traveller from the ordinary sequence of life. One is no longer moving from evening to night to morning in the human way. Thus one is drifting in a realm where sequence itself has loosened, and once sequence loosens, memory begins to loosen with it. This matters greatly, for time is not only measured by clocks or shadows, it is also measured by relation. Before this came that. After that came something else. We know where we are in time because events stand in order around us, but the other world weakens that order. Moments do not seem to pass normally. They seem to hover. They seem full and self-contained. The traveller no longer feels themselves moving through time. They feel themselves dwelling inside an endless present. That endless present is one of the fairest and cruelest gifts of enchantment. Fair, because it feels beautiful. Cruel, because mortals cannot remain within it without loss. A human life is made partly of limit. We live by endings. We know what matters because time passes. The night cannot be held. The season changes. The child grows. The elder fades. Work must be done before daylight is gone. Love itself becomes precious because it is not outside time. But the other world seems to offer a different condition, one in which ending is suspended. To a weary mortal that may seem merciful. Yet once ending disappears, return also becomes uncertain. The ordinary world continues elsewhere, faithful to its own law, while the enchanted traveller remains untouched and unaware. So the problem is not only that time runs differently in the fairy realm, it is that the traveller stops feeling time in the mortal way. That inner change is the true danger. Many of the old stories understand this with remarkable subtlety. They do not always spend long passages explaining the distortion. They simply show its effects. A person enters joyfully. They remain with no clear sense of how long. They leave thinking little has passed. Then comes the revelation. The story trusts the listener to understand that enchantment has carried the traveller outside the normal human rhythm. Sometimes the hidden world itself seems almost designed to encourage this. Its beauty is repetitive without becoming dull. Song follows song, hall follows chamber, moonlit wandering follows feasting. The place does not jolt the senses back into caution. It smooths them. It quiets all inner alarms. In the human world, discomfort often protects us. Hunger sends us home. Fatigue ends the celebration. Cold reminds us to leave the field and seek shelter. But in the fairy world, such discomforts are absent or muted. The traveller is left with pleasure alone, and pleasure without limit becomes a kind of trap. Not because pleasure is evil, but because it can dissolve attention. And once attention dissolves, time goes with it. This is why certain folk warnings focus so strongly on remaining alert. Do not eat there. Do not drink there. Do not sit too long. Do not linger when called. Such warnings recognize that the greatest threat is not immediate harm, it is absorption. To eat, drink, sit, join, and relax within the hidden world is to begin accepting its rhythm. And once that rhythm takes hold, the human sense of urgency fades. Then even memory of home may begin to dim, not vanish entirely, but soften, a little less sharp with each passing moment. This too is part of enchantment's power. It does not merely hold the traveller in place, it weakens the pull of what lies elsewhere. Home becomes distant not only in space, but in feeling. The road back matters less while the music plays. The duty to return seems less pressing while the hall remains bright. The names of those waiting in the human world still exist, but they no longer press upon the heart with the same force. The traveller is not faithless. The traveller is enchanted. And enchantment rearranges value. It makes the present sweetness feel more real than the absent life one meant to return to. That is why the moment of awakening, when it comes, is so severe. It is not only the discovery of lost years, It is the sudden restoration of mortal perspective. All at once the weight of time returns. The body belongs again to sequence, age, change, consequence. What felt like one suspended night is revealed as a long absence. What felt like harmless delight is revealed as irreversible loss. But that awakening belongs to the next stage of the tale, for now we remain inside the spell itself. Inside the hall, the music, the stillness, the false abundance of time. And there, in that bright and unwearied place, the traveller does not yet know the truth. They only know that the night seems generous, that departure can wait, and that there is always room for one more song before morning. Only later will they understand that the morning they trusted has not been waiting for them at all. And so, now that we have seen how enchantment softened the body, quieted urgency, and dissolved the traveller's sense of passing time, and we can move toward the moment the stories most often preserve with greatest pain, the return from the hidden world, and the discovery that the human world has changed beyond recognition. And so, having remained for a while within the spell itself, we can now come to the moment that gives these stories their deepest sorrow, the return. For in tales of fairy time, the return is rarely a rescue. It is a revelation. The traveller leaves the hidden world thinking little has changed. The music has ended, or the hall has dimmed, or some inward stirring has reminded them at last of home. They step back across the threshold, expecting to find the human world waiting in its familiar shape. The road should still be the same road. The house should still stand as they left it. The people they carry in memory should still be where memory placed them. But the world does not meet them that way. It has gone on. That is the first wound. Not that the world has been destroyed, but that it has continued. The grass has grown and been cut many times. Seasons have turned beyond counting. Walls have weathered. Roofs have sunk or been repaired. Children have become old, and the old have passed into the grave. The traveller, who believed only an evening had slipped away, now stands before a world that has obeyed a longer law. This contrast is what gives the return its force. The traveller comes back unchanged, or nearly unchanged, only to find change everywhere else. Their own body may still feel close to the hour of departure. Their memory still burns with the sharpness of recent things. But nothing outside them confirms that nearness. The place they left belongs now to a different moment in time, and that difference cannot be argued with. A name is spoken, and no one knows it. A house is sought, and another family lives there. A field remembered from youth now lies divided, altered, or strangely empty. The traveller may ask the way to people who seem like strangers, only to learn that those they seek have long been dead. This is one of the cruelest features of the motif. Loss arrives first as confusion. The traveller does not at once understand the full scale of what has happened. They only begin to notice that things are slightly wrong. A road bends differently. A gate is missing. A tree has grown vast where once it was young. The faces are unfamiliar. The speech may even sound subtly altered. At first, these might seem like small disturbances, but one by one they gather until the truth becomes unavoidable. Too much time has passed, and once that truth settles, the ordinary world takes on a strange quality of its own. It has become, for the returner, almost as uncanny as the fairy world. The traveller is back among mortal things, yet nothing feels fully secure. What should have been home has become foreign. What should have welcomed now stands at a distance. The familiar world is still there, but it is no longer familiar in the old way. That is why the return is not simply a return, it is a second crossing. Only this time the crossing leads not into wonder, but into estrangement. The traveller has left the other world behind, yet cannot fully re-enter the human world as they once belonged to it. They stand between times. Their memory belongs to one world, their body now stands in another. The two do not meet. This is the true loneliness of the returner. They know the place before them, and they do not know it. They belong there, and they do not belong there. Irish folklore understands this tension with remarkable tenderness. It knows that grief is not only the loss of persons, but the loss of continuity. To come home too late is not only to mourn the dead, it is to mourn the vanished shape of life itself. The room is gone, the voice is gone, the arrangement of things is gone. Even if the land remains, the way of living within it has changed. The traveller may stand where their house once stood and feel the cruel overlap of two realities. In memory, the fire is lit. The door opens. A known voice calls from inside. In the present, there is silence, or strangers, or ruin. Memory and reality press against one another and do not join. That pressure is heartbreaking. The returner carries a whole world inwardly that no longer exists outwardly. This is why the changed home is such a powerful image in stories of fairy time. Home is not only shelter, it is rhythm, it is repetition. It is knowing where things are, who waits, what hour it is, what tomorrow will ask. To lose home in this deeper sense is to lose one's place in time itself. The traveller has not only missed years, they have missed the life those years contained. And missed life cannot be recovered. The stories rarely permit repair. There may be recognition of what has happened. There may be sorrow. There may be warning. But there is seldom restoration. The dead do not rise because the traveller has returned. The lost years do not fold back. The household does not reassemble. Folklore can be merciful in many ways, but in this matter it is stern. Time once lost remains lost. This sternness gives the motif its enduring weight. If the traveller could simply weep, rest, and begin again without deeper cost, the tale would lose much of its force. But the old stories do not soften the consequence that way. They insist that beauty can take more than it first appears to offer, and that the loveliest detours may end in a homecoming too late to heal. There is often, too, a moral silence in these returns that makes them even more affecting. The traveller is not always punished for wickedness. They have not necessarily done wrong in any grand or malicious sense. They have followed music, accepted welcome, stayed too long in wonder. Their loss arises not from cruelty of character, but from mortal vulnerability. That makes the sorrow more human. The listener does not stand safely apart, judging. And the listener feels how easily such a thing could happen in story, how little is required. One invitation, one lingering, one mistaken trust in the hour. This also helps explain why return scenes in fairy lore often feel quieter than scenes of entry. Entry glitters. Return strips away. The hall disappears. The music is gone. The traveller stands under ordinary sky once more, but ordinary sky has become unbearable in its own way. It sheds light not on safety, but on absence. Dawn is no comfort if dawn reveals that decades have passed. Even the land can seem changed in spirit. Fields once walked in youth now feel older than the traveller's own memory. Paths remain, but no longer lead where they once did. The world has thickened with years the returner never lived. Others have inhabited those years, suffered them, rejoiced in them, grown weary in them. The traveller stands outside that unseen history. They have skipped it, and because they have skipped it, they cannot fully enter its consequences. This creates a strange inversion. In the other world, time failed to make itself felt. In the human world, time now makes itself felt all at once. The traveller is struck not by the passing of 1 hour after another, but by the accumulated force of many years landing in a single moment of recognition. That concentration of loss is almost too much for the heart to bear. No wonder these stories remain haunting. They turn time itself into a delayed blow, and the blow falls at home. That is perhaps the cruelest detail of all. The place one hoped would receive and heal now becomes the place where truth wounds most sharply. Home is where the loss is measured. Home is where the dead are discovered to be dead. Home is where memory proves powerless against what time has done. The traveller does not merely return from enchantment, they return into grief. And once grief begins, another realization follows close behind. The traveller is changed as well. That change may not be fully visible yet, but it is already there. One who has stepped outside mortal time cannot simply step back in without consequence. The body may still seem young, the face may not show the years, the voice may still carry the old names, yet inwardly something has broken in continuity. The returner has become a person without a proper hour, one whose memory and present life no longer stand in agreement. That deeper wound belongs to the next part of the journey, for the return is not only the discovery of a changed world, it is also the beginning of a new and quieter sorrow, the sorrow of living after that discovery, of carrying on when one no longer belongs wholly to the world one has found again. And so, now that we have stood with the traveller at the threshold of home and watched recognition darken into grief, we can move more fully into that inward aftermath, the loneliness, displacement, and sorrow of returning too late and of surviving one's own absence. And so, having reached the moment of return and seen the world altered beyond expectation, we can now remain with the grief that follows. For the true pain of fairy time does not end when the traveller understands what has happened. In many ways, it begins there. To return too late is not only to discover loss, it is to continue living inside that discovery. It is to wake, speak, walk, and remember in a world that no longer holds one's memories in the right places. The home is changed. The loved ones are gone. The road remains, but leads into a life from which the traveller has already been removed. That is a sorrow deeper than surprise. It is a sorrow of misplacement. The returner is alive, and yet the life to which they meant to return is gone. This creates a loneliness unlike ordinary loneliness. One may grieve the dead and still remain among the living. One may lose a home and still build another. But the sorrow carried by the returner in these tales is more difficult to settle. It is not only that something dear has vanished, it is that the returner has been cut loose from their rightful time. They belong emotionally to a world that has already closed behind them. That is why these stories so often leave a sense that the traveller has not really come back at all. Their body has returned. Their memory has returned. But their place has not. The old Irish imagination understood this with quiet precision. A person who has stepped outside human time cannot re-enter it as though nothing has happened. Even if they stand once more in their native place, they do so as someone out of rhythm with it. The shared continuity that binds one life to another has been broken. The years other people lived have become, for the returner, an emptiness they cannot cross. This is one of the cruelest things about lost time. It is not only absence, but exclusion. The returner has missed births, deaths, marriages, seasons, harvests, winters, reconciliations, quarrels, illnesses, farewells. All the small and large events that weave a life into the lives around it have passed without them. Those years were lived by others. The traveller cannot step into them now. They can only hear of them afterward, as one hears of history. And history is colder than memory. Memory says, I was there. History says, it happened without you. That difference wounds the heart. It also helps explain why the sorrow in these tales feels so still. The returner cannot easily act against it. There is no villain to strike down, no gate to close before the loss occurs, no simple reversal. The wound is made of time, and time does not yield. The traveller must stand before what has happened and endure the full helplessness of it. In some stories, this helplessness takes the form of questions. Where is my father now? Who lives in this house? What became of the child I left to sleep? Questions like these carry more than curiosity. They carry the final hope that perhaps the loss is not complete, but the answers rarely bring comfort. The names sought belong now to the dead, the old, or the forgotten. Even when some trace remains, it does not restore the world as it was. Recognition only sharpens the break. There is also a painful imbalance in the returner's condition. They remember vividly, or others do not. Their sorrow is immediate. For the world around them, the years in question are long settled. Those who mourned them, if any did, have already lived through that grief. Those who replaced them in the household have already formed a new order. The returner arrives carrying fresh anguish into a world whose anguish has already passed into custom, inheritance, and memory. This makes the returner feel strangely untimely in every direction. Too late for the old life. Too early, perhaps, to accept the new one. Too burdened by memory to belong lightly among strangers. Too changed by wonder and loss to feel at ease in the ordinary world again. That is why the return from fairy time is often more tragic than the entry into it was marvellous. Wonder isolates for a time, grief isolates more deeply. The traveller has seen beauty outside human life, but what remains afterward is not beauty. It is dislocation, and dislocation is difficult to heal. There is no simple household remedy for a broken continuity of time. Work cannot mend it. Rest cannot mend it. Even companionship may fail to reach it. One may be pitied. One may be offered shelter. One may be spoken to kindly. Yet none of these restore the missing years or the rightful place within them. The returner lives on, but not where life was meant to have unfolded. This is where the emotional power of fairy time becomes especially human. Beneath all its hills and music, it speaks to the fear of becoming a stranger to one's own world. Many people know, in smaller and more ordinary ways, what it is to come back changed to a place that has moved on. To revisit a childhood home and find it altered. To meet familiar ground after long absence and feel that it no longer answers to one's memories. To realize that others have lived through years one cannot reclaim. The folklore heightens this into supernatural form. But the grief itself is close to everyday human experience. That closeness is what makes the tales endure. They're not only about fairies, they're about belonging and the breaking of belonging. They're about time as the keeper of human relationships, and they are about the sorrow that follows when one falls out of time, even briefly, and discovers that the world has not held one's place in trust. There is often shame in this sorrow as well, though it is not always spoken plainly. The returner may feel that they failed in some duty by staying away, like even if the staying was enchanted and not fully chosen. They may feel they abandoned what they loved, yet at the same time, they know they did not understand what was happening. This creates a painful tension. They are innocent, and yet they suffer as though guilty. They are victims of enchantment, and yet must bear the consequences alone. That emotional complexity gives the old stories much of their depth. They do not present the returner as simply cursed or simply foolish. They present a human being overtaken by beauty, delayed by wonder, and then made to carry the full burden of what wonder cost. It is an unusually tender kind of tragedy. Tender because the loss is intimate. Tragic because nothing restores it. There is also the matter of speech. How does one explain such a return? Yeah, how does one tell others that one has been gone for what felt like a night and has come back after years? The returner may speak the truth and still not be fully heard. The experience itself resists ordinary language. The hall, the music, the stillness beyond time. These are hard enough to describe. Harder still is the inward break that follows. Words can name the dead, the vanished house, the changed field, but they struggle to name the feeling of surviving into one's own lateness. So the returner often stands in a silence larger than grief alone, a silence of unbelonging, a silence of knowing that one's deepest loss cannot be fully shared. This too is part of the sorrow of returning too late. One becomes solitary not only in memory but in meaning. Others may offer sympathy, but they still inhabit ordinary time. They move through the years one by one. The returner did not. Their life now contains a gap too strange to fit neatly into common understanding, and yet the old stories preserve them. That is a kind of mercy. Folklore remembers what ordinary life cannot easily hold. It gives form to the one who came back too late. It does not repair their loss, but it refuses to let the shape of that loss disappear. Through story, the returner remains visible. Their grief is acknowledged. Their estrangement is made meaningful. They become not only a lonely figure, but a bearer of warning and of wonder. Warning, because their sorrow teaches caution. Wonder, because their path touched the hidden world. This double quality matters. The returner is tragic, but not empty. Their suffering reveals something about the world itself. It reveals that beauty can divide as well as bless, that hidden thresholds carry real consequence, that time, once loosened, may not be gathered again, and that the deepest losses are sometimes those that arrive without malice, almost gently, and only afterwards show their full weight. By now, the shape of the old motif stands clearly before us. The traveller enters, the traveller lingers, the traveller returns, the traveller grieves. Yet within Irish tradition, one tale gives this pattern especially luminous and enduring form. In it, the beauty of the otherworld is at its most radiant, and the sorrow of returning too late reaches one of its fullest expressions. It is time, then, to turn toward that great story of youth, love, and irreversible loss, toward Ushi, toward Neve, toward Tir Nog. And so, having remained with the sorrow of those who return too late, we can now turn to the tale that gives this sorrow one of its most memorable forms in Irish tradition. The story of Oisin and Tir Nog. If the earlier parts of our journey have shown the pattern of fairy time in fragments, the threshold, the invitation, the enchantment, the altered return, this tale gathers those elements into a single bright and mournful vision. It is one of the clearest expressions of the longing at the heart of the Irish Otherworld, a place of youth, beauty, and apparent freedom from loss, which only later reveals the full cost of dwelling there. Oisin, son of Fionn MacCoohwill, belongs already to a world shaped by heroism, memory, and song. He is not an ordinary wanderer who stumbles by chance into the hidden realm. He is a figure of stature, of poetry, of noble lineage, and that matters. For the tale of Tir Nog is not only about a man being lured away, it is about the encounter between mortal greatness and a realm even greatness cannot master. The story begins, as many such stories do, with a rival from beyond the ordinary world. Neve of the golden hair comes out of the west. She is radiant. She is beautiful in a way that signals immediately that she does not belong to the ordinary human order, and like so many figures of the otherworld, she does not appear with threat. She appears with invitation. She comes not as a conqueror, but as a messenger of another condition of life. She offers Oisin passage to Tir na Nog, the land of youth, where sorrow is absent. Age does not consume the body, and delight does not decay under the pressure of time. It is a promise difficult for any mortal to resist. Beauty calls to beauty, wonder calls to longing, and Oisin follows. Already the old pattern is present. A world grows thin. A figure appears from beyond it. A welcome is offered. The mortal accepts. Yet here, the invitation is not through hidden music in a hill or strange light over a mound. It comes in a more open and majestic form. Tir na Nog is not only a hidden chamber of the fairies, it is a fully imagined otherworld kingdom, green, bright, and untouched by the wasting law that governs mortal life. To enter it is not merely to step aside from one's road, it is to leave the human age behind altogether. In that land, Oisin lives in joy with Niamh. That joy is central to the tale. Without it, the sorrow would lose its depth. Tir na Nog is not bitter while he dwells there. It is not a place of chains. It is a place of abundance and youth, of pleasure without visible ending. The air of the story is not grim. It is luminous. Oisin is not tormented while he remains there. He is fulfilled. The land seems to offer what human life cannot secure for long: vigour without decline, love without parting, delight without the shadow of age. This is precisely why the story matters so much to the theme of fairy time. The otherworld does not only tempt the weary and the lost, it tempts even the noble. It offers not merely escape but completion, or what seems like completion. For a time, Oisin has no reason to measure the passing of days in the mortal way. Tir na Nog does not teach urgency. It does not wear the face of loss. He is with Niamh, and the place itself seems untouched by the erosion that gives human life its sorrowful shape. In such a realm, the ordinary habits by which a person marks time grow faint. Why count the days where no day seems stolen by age? Why fear the years where no year leaves a wound upon the body? And so, as in other tales of fairy time, the deeper movement of time disappears not by force, but by sweetness. The traveller lingers because nothing within the enchanted world compels departure. Yet even within delight memory remains. This is one of the most human things about Oisin. Though surrounded by a land of youth, he is still mortal in heart. Tir na Nog may quiet the sense of passing years, but it does not erase attachment. At some point longing bends back toward Ireland, toward Fionn, toward the Fi na, means toward the world left behind. The old life begins to call again, not because the other world has failed in beauty, but because memory itself remains faithful. That inward turning is deeply moving. The heart does not always stop loving what it has left, even when it has entered wonder. And so Oisin asks to return. This request carries within it the whole tragedy to come, for the listener already knows or feels what Oisin does not fully understand. No one leaves the other world unchanged. No one returns lightly from a realm beyond mortal time. Yet the wish to see home again is so natural, so tender, that it cannot be condemned. Oisin is not restless in a shallow way. He is homesick in the deepest sense. He longs not merely for a place, but for a continuity of love and identity that even Tir na Nog cannot completely replace. Niamh, in many tellings, warns him. That warning matters. It is one of the old signs that the worlds are not equal. She knows what he does not yet feel fully enough, that the mortal world has not stood still. Time has passed there in a way it has not passed for him. The return, if it comes, will not be simple. He may look back toward Ireland as though toward a place recently left, but Ireland has been living through the centuries while he has dwelt beyond them. He goes anyway. And here, the tale reaches one of the most haunting moments in all Irish legend. Oisin returns to Ireland not as one returning from a short absence, but as one stepping from timelessness into the full, accumulated weight of mortal change. What he finds is not the Ireland he knew. The Fianna are gone. Fionn is gone. The great world of his youth has fallen into the distance of history. The land remains, but the age has changed. He does not come back to his own present. He comes back to a future that has already absorbed and buried his past. This is fairy time in one of its purest forms, not simply delay, but displacement across centuries. The emotional power of this return lies partly in its scale. In many fairy tales, the loss is counted in years. Here it opens into something larger. An entire heroic world has passed away. Oisin returns not merely to a changed household, but to a changed Ireland. This widens the sorrow from the personal to the cultural. He is not only separated from loved ones, he is separated from his age, from the order of life that gave his name meaning, and because of that his return feels almost impossible. He is a man of one time standing in another, a living memory among those for whom his world is already legend. That image is almost unbearably sad. It shows with painful clarity what fairy time does to belonging. Oisin is not old in the way he should be old. He is not dead in the way his companions are dead. He exists between categories, preserved by the otherworld, and thereby made unfit for the ordinary sequence of mortal life. He has kept his youth only by losing his rightful place in history. The tale's final movement deepens this tragedy further. In many versions, Oisin is warned not to touch the earth when he returns. The horse from Tir Nunog must carry him. He may look, but not fully rejoin. This warning is profound in symbolic force. It suggests that the bond between body and mortal time is fragile. The ground of Ireland itself belongs now to centuries he has not lived. To touch it is to submit at once to the law from which he has long been kept apart, and when the warning is broken, the full force of time falls upon him. In that instant, the protection of the otherworld ends. Age, held back for so long, rushes in. The gap between worlds closes violently. What had been suspended is no longer suspended. The body is claimed by the years all at once. This is one of the starkest images in the whole tradition. Time is not cancelled, only delayed, and when delay ends, reckoning comes. Yet even here the story is not merely harsh. It is sorrowful in a larger, more tender way. Oisin's fate does not feel like punishment for arrogance alone, nor for simple disobedience. It feels like the inevitable breaking of an impossible condition. He tried to look back. He tried to touch home. He tried to stand once more in the mortal world he loved. But the worlds could not be joined on those terms. That is what makes the tale so enduring. It is not only a marvel, it is a lament for youth, for memory, for vanished companions, for the impossible wish to keep beauty without losing time, or to return from timelessness and find the world still waiting. In Oisin and Tir Irish tradition gives us a vision both radiant and severe. The otherworld is shown at its loveliest, the mortal heart is shown at its most faithful, and the sorrow of return is shown at its fullest depth. The tale does not deny the beauty of the land of youth, it lets that beauty shine. But it also makes clear that mortals cannot dwell outside time without paying for it in the currency of belonging. And that is why the story stands so naturally at the centre of our journey. It gathers into one great arc what the older motifs suggest in many smaller ways. The invitation of wonder, the suspension of time, the longing for home, the return too late, the breaking of the body under accumulated years, and the final knowledge that no mortal can step freely between these worlds and remain whole. Yet Oisin's tale, for all its power, is not the only pattern by which Irish tradition imagines time lost, delayed, or strangely altered through contact with the hidden world. Around this great story stand many smaller tales and recurring motifs, each preserving some variation of absence, enchantment, and changed return. And so, with Oisin and Niamh now behind us like figures receding into twilight, we can widen our view once more and look at the broader field of Irish stories in which time slips, the human world moves on, and the one who returns finds that the old order has gone without them. And so, with Oisin's great return now lingering behind us, we can widen the circle and look beyond a single famous tale. For Irish tradition does not place all the burden of fairy time on one story alone. The same sorrow appears again and again in smaller forms. A man disappears for what seems to him a short while. A woman is drawn away into music or brightness. A traveller enters a hill, a fort, a hidden dwelling, or an uncanny gathering. Someone goes missing near a place the old people already mistrust. Then, after an interval no one measures correctly, the pattern resolves in the old and painful way. The one who was absent returns changed, or does not return at all. These recurring patterns matter because they show that fairy time was not merely a grand heroic theme. It also belonged to local imagination. It touched roads, fields, households, and the ordinary risks of moving through the land at the wrong hour. The hidden world was not reserved only for legendary figures. It could brush close to anyone. A shepherd, a rider, a young woman walking home, a labourer passing a fort at dusk. All might stand in folklore near the edge of altered time. This gives the motif a different texture from the story of Oisin. In Oisin's tale the scale is vast. The loss stretches across centuries. The heroic age itself slips into the past. But in local or lesser tales the pattern often feels more intimate. The missing years may be fewer. The household may be smaller. The emotional focus falls not on national memory, but on the quiet ache of private loss. And yet the structure remains recognisably the same. There is an approach to the hidden world, and there is enchantment or removal. There is absence, then there is return, or the painful knowledge that return will not come. One common pattern is that of the brief disappearance. A person vanishes from ordinary sight, while those around them search, wait, mourn, or begin to assume the worst. To the absent person, however, little time seems to pass. They may experience only an evening, a feast, a dance, or a strange period of wandering in beauty and calm. But when they emerge again, the world has moved farther than they understood. The gap between inward experience and outward time creates the shock. This is fairy time in one of its most recognisable forms. Not a dramatic crossing into a named paradise, but a smaller and more disturbing dislocation. The missing person has not travelled far in the ordinary sense. Yet they have been removed from the common flow of time. Another pattern centres on the hidden gathering. A person hears music, laughter, or celebration in a place where no celebration should be. They find a hall beneath a mound, a company at a fort, riders moving under moonlight, or some enclosed brightness that seems alive with festivity. The atmosphere is warm, complete, and inviting. The person joins it, whether willingly or almost without noticing. Inside, nothing feels urgent. The gathering seems self-contained, untouched by ordinary fatigue or ending. Once again, time weakens. Only later does the cost become known. This recurring image of the hidden feast is deeply revealing. It suggests that the otherworld is not chaotic. It is ordered. It has its own society, rhythm, and customs of welcome. The mortal who enters is not always treated as prey. Sometimes they are treated as a guest. But being a guest in another realm does not erase the danger of dwelling under another realm's law. The feast is hospitable, yet still perilous. Its pleasures do not rescue the mortal from consequence. They merely soften the mortal into forgetting consequence long enough for loss to ripen. There are also tales of those drawn not by halls or courts, but by more elusive forms of absence. A person follows a light. A person steps aside from the road. A person pauses at a place known to be uncertain, and then is simply gone. These stories can be especially haunting because they leave more unsaid. The hidden world does not fully reveal itself. There may be no splendid description of what lies within it. There is only disappearance, and then, perhaps, a changed return. The economy of such tales gives them force. A single mistake in place or hour is enough. Some stories do not even require full return to communicate the idea of altered time. It is enough that a person is believed to be away among the fairies while ordinary years pass in the human world. The absence itself carries the shape of fairy time. Those left behind must live through the long duration of loss. The missing person, whether they ever come back or not, belongs to another rhythm now. This too is part of the folklore imagination. Not only the grief of the returner, but the grief of those who remain in mortal time, waiting under laws the hidden world does not share. That larger field of absence touches another old theme as well. The fear that certain disappearances are not final in the usual way, but suspended. A person may be gone and yet not wholly dead. They may exist elsewhere, delayed, detained, or held among the fairies. This uncertainty keeps mourning open. It prevents clean endings. The household may continue, but with a wound that does not close properly because no one can say with certainty what world the absent one now inhabits. This is one reason fairy lore often feels so emotionally complex. It does not always offer the finality of death. It offers something stranger, the possibility of continued being without continued belonging. And that possibility is, in some ways, more difficult to bear. Death at least belongs clearly to mortal law. Fairy absence does not. It leaves the heart suspended between hope and surrender. There are also stories in which the hidden world seems to take particular hold at certain times of year or under certain conditions. Though the details vary, the broader pattern remains clear. There are moments when the unseen world presses closer to the visible one, and during those moments a person may more easily slip out of ordinary time. Seasonal turnings, feast nights, lonely hours, and places of customary caution can all intensify this risk. The point is not that every story agrees in detail. The point is that Irish tradition repeatedly imagines time loss as something that occurs not at random, but when world, place and hour align in dangerous ways. This gives the motif a lived quality. It connects story to custom. A warning told beside the fire can shape how one walks after dark. A tale about music from the hill can shape how one listens when the wind carries strange sounds. A memory of someone gone too long can shape how a household thinks about certain roads, forts, or fields. In this way, fairy time is not merely narrative decoration. It becomes part of a practical moral geography. It teaches where not to linger, when not to follow, and what kinds of beauty should be approached with caution. The recurring tales form a network of feeling around the land. They train attention. They create zones of reverence and unease. There is another pattern worth noticing as well. Sometimes the person who returns is not only late, but subtly altered in manner, spirit, or relation to the ordinary world. They may seem inward, detached, or unable to resume the old life fully. Yet this detail strengthens the sense that the hidden world does not merely steal time, it leaves an imprint. Even where the body comes back, the self does not come back untouched. That helps connect the shorter local tales to the grander emotional logic we've already seen in Oisin. The scale may differ, but the fracture of belonging remains. And always beneath these variations lies the same deep tension between wonder and cost. The hidden world remains alluring. The absence remains painful. The return, when it comes, is burdened by delay. The life left behind does not wait in stillness. That repetition across many stories is important. It tells us that fairy time was not a single strange idea preserved by accident. It was part of a larger Irish understanding of how the unseen world touched mortal life. The contact with that world could bless, enchant, frighten, or transform. But one of its most persistent marks was misalignment. The mortal who crossed too close to it risked falling out of step with the ordinary world. Once out of step, restoration was uncertain. So whether the tale centres on a radiant lady from beyond the sea, a hidden hall in the earth, a road crossed at the wrong hour, or a quiet disappearance no one can fully explain, the deeper structure remains. The fairies do not only inhabit another place, they inhabit another time, and to be caught in that time, even briefly, is to risk losing one's place in human life. That is why these stories endure in clusters rather than isolation. Each one deepens the others. A famous legend gives grandeur. A local tale gives intimacy. A household warning gives practical edge. Together they form a tradition in which absence, delay, enchantment, and altered return become part of one coherent vision of the world. Yet a vision like that does not remain only in story. It also shapes behaviour. If people told such tales again and again, then they must also have drawn lessons from them. They must have wondered how one protected oneself, how one recognised danger early, and how one avoided being drawn too far into a world whose beauty could cost so much. And so, with these broader patterns of absence and altered return now gathered before us, we can move from story to caution, toward the warnings, taboos, and quiet acts of respect by which people tried to live safely beside places where the hidden world and its dangerous time were thought to press closest. And so, with the wider pattern of fairy absence now before us, we can turn from story to response. For if the hidden world stood so near to the ordinary one, and if time itself could be lost through careless crossing, then people would naturally ask how such danger might be avoided. Irish folklore does not always answer that question with formal rules. It answers more often with habits, cautions, refusals, and small acts of respect. That is one of its most revealing qualities. The unseen world is not handled as a problem to be solved once and for all. It is handled as a presence to be lived beside carefully. This means that protection often begins not with power, but with restraint. Do not go there. Do not stay there. Do not interfere. Do not answer too quickly. Do not assume that beauty is harmless. Such advice may sound simple, but in folklore simplicity often carries depth. A warning repeated across generations gathers force not because it is ornate, but because it proves memorable. The person walking home at dusk does not need a long explanation. They need to remember not to follow music from the hill. The farmer does not need a full theology of the otherworld. He needs to remember not to damage the old fort in the field. The child does not need a philosophy of liminal time. They need to remember that some places are left alone after dark. These are practical forms of reverence, and reverence itself is one of the oldest protections. Among the most persistent cautions in Irish law is the warning not to disturb certain places. Fairy hills, ringfors, old mounds, lone thorn trees, and particular paths are often treated with care, not because people imagine them as empty relics, but because they're thought to remain inhabited in some hidden way. The visible form may be earth, stone, grass, or root, but beneath or within that visible form lies another claim. To disturb such a place is not only rude, it is risky. The risk is not always immediate punishment in a theatrical sense. Sometimes it is misfortune, sometimes illness, sometimes a chain of small troubles that seem to follow from a single act of disrespect. And in the deeper background of such belief stands the same principle we've been tracing all along. If a place belongs partly to the hidden world, then to intrude upon it is to invite the hidden world to intrude in return. This is why non-interference matters so much. One does not cut what should not be cut. One does not level what should not be levelled. One does not block what should remain open. Fairy paths, in particular, were often remembered as routes not to be obstructed. Whether taken literally, symbolically, or somewhere between the two, the underlying thought is clear. The unseen world has its own movements. Human beings ignore those movements at their peril. A path may cross a field, a doorway, or a house site. To build across it carelessly is to assume that the visible world is the only world whose patterns matter. Folklore warns against that assumption. It teaches that safety sometimes lies in allowing passage where one does not fully understand who passes. There is also caution around time itself, not clock time in the modern sense, but vulnerable hours, dusk, night, certain feast evenings, moments when the known world has begun to loosen. Such hours matter because the hidden world is thought to press closer then. What is harmless in bright daylight may become uncertain after sunset. What feels like an ordinary field at noon may become a threshold by moonlight. Because of this, many warnings are temporal as much as spatial. A place may not be forbidden absolutely. It may simply be unwise at the wrong hour. This kind of caution shows how closely folklore ties danger to conditions rather than to fixed labels alone. Safety is not only about where one is, but when one is there, how one is there, and in what state of mind one arrives. A tired traveller alone at dusk is more vulnerable than a cheerful crowd at noon. A solitary road after dark is not the same road as in the afternoon. The world changes by hour. So does the nearness of the unseen. That is why wandering has moral weight in so many of these stories. To wander carelessly is to lower one's guard. To remain too long in a lonely place is to become available to encounter. To drift without attention is to risk crossing where one did not mean to cross. Protection, then, often begins with alertness. Know the place. Know the hour. Know when to turn back. That emphasis on alertness also appears in warnings about invitation. Do not follow every song. Do not trust every brightness. Do not accept every welcome from what you cannot place. These warnings do not condemn joy in itself. Rather, they mark a boundary between ordinary human hospitality and the hospitality of another realm. Food, drink, music, and company are not dangerous simply because they are pleasant. They become dangerous when they arise from a source outside the ordinary world and begin to pull the listener or traveller beyond ordinary judgment. So caution often means refusing to deepen contact. Do not sit down. Do not join the feast. Do not eat there. Do not drink there. Do not promise what you do not understand. These repeated refusals are forms of self-preservation. They help keep the mortal within mortal rhythm. To eat with the hidden company is to begin accepting their order. To sit too long is to surrender urgency. To follow their customs is to risk entering their time. The wise response in folklore is often not heroic confrontation, but measured withdrawal. Leave early. Leave quietly. Leave before delight becomes entanglement. This is an important point. Irish folklore often presents wisdom not as domination over the unseen, but as proper distance from it. The human being is not expected to master the other world. The human being is expected to recognize its difference and act accordingly. That is a humbler kind of wisdom, and perhaps a more durable one. It is also why courtesy appears so often beside fear. One does not always protect oneself by insulting the hidden world or denying its existence. One may instead acknowledge it cautiously and avoid giving offence. Respectful speech, respectful avoidance, and the refusal to desecrate what belongs to another order all work together. The hidden world is dangerous, but it is not always treated as a crude enemy. It is treated as powerful, nearby, and not to be crossed lightly. This attitude shapes whole ways of living beside the land. A field may be worked, but a mound left untouched within it. A road may be altered, but not where old custom forbids. A tree may be valued not only for its wood, but for the danger of cutting it. These are not merely superstitions in the shallow sense. They are expressions of a relationship between human beings in a layered landscape, one in which the visible is never assumed to be all that matters. There is another kind of protection as well, community memory. People stay safe partly because stories remain alive. The tale of someone who vanished near a fort warns the next generation about that fort. The memory of misfortune after a thorn tree was cut warns the next person against taking an axe to such a tree. Here, the story of music heard on the wrong night teaches listeners to distrust certain pleasures when they arise in the wrong place. Folklore protects by repetition. It turns memory into caution. It makes the past useful. This, perhaps, is one of the deepest functions of tales about fairy time. They preserve not only wonder, but practical distance. They remind the listener that enchantment works softly. One does not usually lose years through one dramatic mistake alone. One loses them by yielding too gradually, by staying too long, by forgetting to return when return was still possible. The warning, then, is not only against great recklessness, it is against small drift, the wrong pause, the extra song, the one invitation accepted too easily. That is why self-protection in these traditions often looks less like battle than like discipline. Keep moving. Keep your sense. Do not linger where you should not linger. Do not let beauty empty you of caution. Remember the hour. Remember home. Remember that not every welcome is meant for mortals to share without cost. When seen together, these warnings and taboos form a coherent ethic. Respect the land. Respect boundaries, respect the hour, respect what you do not fully understand. And above all, do not mistake nearness for permission. The hidden world may stand close beside the human one, but closeness does not mean safety. A hill may be beautiful and still forbidden. A song may be lovely and still destructive. A path may seem open and still belong to another order. Wisdom lies in knowing that enchantment is real, but not therefore to be trusted. This ethic of caution also reveals something tender about the old stories. They do not assume that people can avoid wonder entirely. They know the human heart is drawn to music, light, and beauty. The warnings exist because attraction is natural. The goal is not to become stone deaf to all delight. The goal is to remember that some forms of delight ask too much in return. And when that is remembered, the landscape becomes not merely frightening, but morally alive. It asks for discernment. It asks for modesty. It asks people to live with an awareness that the world contains more than they can command. By now, then, we can see that fairy time was not only a tale of loss after the fact, it also shaped conduct beforehand. It taught people how to move through places of uncertainty. It taught them what not to disturb, what not to follow, what not to accept, and when to turn back. In this way, the old law tried to keep mortals within their rightful rhythm and protect them from slipping, even briefly, into another one. Yet warnings alone do not explain why the motif remains so powerful. To understand that, we must look beyond custom and ask what fairy time may have meant more deeply, what fears, longings, and human truths it gathered into the image of one night becoming many years. And so, with the cautions of the old world now laid out before us, we can move into a quieter and more reflective part of the journey, where story opens into meaning and fairy time begins to reveal what it may have expressed about memory, grief, longing, and the fragile human bond with time itself. And so, with the old warnings and taboos now behind us, we can move into a quieter question. What did fairy time mean? Not only within the stories themselves, but within the human heart that kept telling them. For by now the pattern is clear. A person crosses into beauty. Time loosens. Return comes too late. The old life is gone. The sorrow is deep, and no simple repair is possible. This pattern is too persistent and too emotionally precise to be only ornament. It gathers something real. It gives shape to feelings and fears that belong not only to folklore, but to ordinary life. One of the clearest meanings within fairy time is the fear of lost years. This fear is deeply human. A person may work, hope, suffer, love, and still feel, at some later moment, that time has slipped from their keeping. Years pass while the heart is occupied elsewhere. A life can change while one is not ready. A season of delay can become much longer than intended. The old stories turn this fear into image. One night becomes many years. A brief absence becomes an irretrievable distance. What in ordinary life may happen gradually is made sudden and visible in folklore. That suddenness matters. It lets people feel the truth of loss all at once. Instead of saying simply that time passes too quickly, the story says something stronger. You may step away for a little while and come back to find that life has moved beyond you. In that form, the feeling becomes unforgettable. It acquires a place, a face, a road, a hill, a changed house. Folklore does not argue, it embodies. Fairy time may also give form to grief. Grief often has its own strange relation to time. Those who grieve know that memory can keep a person or place close long after the world has changed. Inwardly, one remains near what has been lost. Outwardly, the years continue. This creates a painful mismatch between inner time and outer time. The heart says this was only yesterday. The world says it was long ago. Fairy time mirrors that tension exactly. The returner carries recent feeling into an aged world. Memory and reality no longer agree. That is one reason the motif feels so sorrowful even when no explicit mourning begins the tale. It is already structured like grief. The traveller leaves, enters a suspended state, and returns to discover that the life held inwardly has already vanished outwardly. The changed home, the dead companions, even the lost household. All of this resembles the shock by which grief makes absence newly real. The old stories may speak of fairies, but they also speak quietly and accurately of how loss feels in the soul. There is another meaning close beside this one, the fear that beauty may detach us from ordinary life. This is more subtle, but no less important. The other world is not ugly. It does not tempt through pain. It tempts through sweetness, radiance, and relief. A person enters it because it seems to offer rest from burden, age, cold, labour, or sorrow. That gives fairy time a deeper psychological truth. Human beings are drawn to what lifts them above hardship. We long for beauty. We long for rest. We long at times to step outside the demands of daily life and dwell somewhere untouched by decay. The stories understand that longing. They do not mock it. But they warn that such longing can become dangerous when it severs a person from the mortal conditions that make life coherent. Too much sweetness, too much stillness, too much suspension from time, and one loses not only burden, but belonging. The old tales know that release has a cost when it goes too far. They know that to be detached from ordinary life is not always freedom. It may also be exile. This gives the motif a moral force without making it narrow or preachy. The lesson is not that beauty is evil, or that delight should be refused at every turn. It is that human beings are creatures of time, duty, and return. We can be refreshed by wonder, but not safely removed from mortality altogether. To lose touch with the mortal rhythm is to risk losing the relationships, labours, and limits that make a human life recognisably human. Fairy time may also express the pain of historical change. This is especially visible in tales like that of Oisin, but it resonates more broadly as well. Communities change, ways of life vanish, names once central to the land slip into memory. One generation lives inside a world that the next generation knows only as story. Fairy time turns this historical truth into intimate experience. The returner becomes someone who has crossed too slowly from one age into another. They stand within the shock of transition. The old order has passed. The new one does not fully receive them. They survive the change but do not belong naturally within it. This is a powerful image in a culture deeply shaped by memory. It says, in effect, that time does not only age individuals, it transforms worlds, and those who remember an earlier world may feel like exiles even while standing on familiar ground. Seen this way, fairy time becomes a way of thinking about discontinuity itself, not only personal lateness, but collective lateness. Not only one household lost, but an entire order of life slipping away. The changed field, the silent hall, the vanished companions, these speak both to private grief and to larger cultural memory. There is still another layer. Fairy time may reflect the old sense that sacred or hidden places belong to another rhythm entirely. Not all meaning in folklore is inward or symbolic in a modern sense. The landscape itself matters. Certain places do seem to carry a different atmosphere. A hill, a ruin, a shore at dusk, or a road through mist. These can create the impression that ordinary time has thinned. In such moments, it is not difficult to understand why people would imagine the land as layered, or why they might feel that some places belonged partly to another order of being. Fairy time gives voice to that perception. It says that the world is not uniform. Some places deepen, some places suspend, some places disturb the ordinary measure by which the rest of life proceeds. This makes the motif more than allegory. It remains rooted in encounter. The person in the story does not merely think about lost time, they feel it through place. The land itself becomes the setting where time loosens. This bond between place and altered time is one reason Irish folklore retains such atmospheric power. The hidden world is not abstract, it is geographic, sensory, local. Meaning emerges not in theory alone, but in road, hill, water, weather, dusk. Perhaps the most universal meaning in fairy time, however, is the fear of returning too late. That fear is nearly impossible to outgrow, to arrive after the chance has passed, to come back when no one is waiting, to realize that one meant to return sooner, speak sooner, love sooner, remain sooner, and did not. This is one of the deepest wounds human time can inflict. Folklore intensifies it until it becomes a whole narrative pattern. But even without the fairies, the wound is recognizable. People miss their hour, they delay, they wander, they become distracted by life or longing or sorrow. Then, one day, they find that the old moment of return is gone. Fairy time makes this fear visible in a way almost no plain statement could. And because it does so through beauty, the effect is even stronger. The years are not stolen by ugliness alone. They are lost in music, in brightness, in a hall of delight, in a place where one would gladly linger. That is what makes the motif so piercing. It understands that some of our deepest losses do not come from what we hate. They come from what we love too unguardedly, or from what seems too lovely to leave in time. Yet the stories are not empty of tenderness. If they were only cruel, they would not endure this way. They preserve longing with remarkable sympathy. The traveller who follows the music is not treated as wholly foolish. The one who lingers in Tir Nog is not condemned for loving beauty. The old folklore knows that mortals are made to desire what shines. It knows the weariness that makes rest seem holy. It knows why the heart would follow a song from the hill. Its warning is serious, but it is not contemptuous. It grieves for the returner even as it instructs the listener. That grief is itself meaningful. It suggests that fairy time is not merely a caution against enchantment, but a meditation on the cost of being human. To be human is to live in time, to love within time, to lose within time, to know that no beauty can be kept untouched forever. The Otherworld offers a dream of escape from that law. The stories then reveal why such escape for mortals cannot remain merciful. In trying to evade time, one loses the very things time had made precious. That is the final irony. The traveller wants wonder, youth, delight, relief. What they lose is home, kin, continuity, and hour. The very limits they hope to escape turn out to be the frame within which human meaning lived. And so fairy time becomes, at its deepest, a story about the necessity and sadness of mortal measure. We suffer because time passes, but we also belong because time passes. Childhood, friendship, harvest, marriage, parting, old age, death. These do not simply burden life, they shape it. To be drawn outside that shaping is to gain marvel for a while, and then to suffer an even harsher form of separation. This is why the idea remains so haunting. It touches beauty, it touches grief, it touches memory, it touches the old fear that the world may change without us. And it speaks all of this through one simple and unforgettable image. A person returns from a single night to find that many years have gone. By now then, and the meaning of fairy time has opened into many layers. Lost years, grief, longing, historical change, sacred landscape, and the fragile human bond with time itself. Yet one question still remains. Why does this idea continue to feel so powerful, even now, long after the old world of forts, fires, and fairy roads has receded? And so, with these meanings gathered quietly around us, we can move into the final main part of our journey, toward the lasting afterlife of this motif, and the reason the thought of one night becoming many years still troubles, consoles, and haunts the imagination today. And so, with the deeper meanings of fairy time now gathered before us, we can come at last to the final question. Why does this old idea still feel so haunting? Why does it remain alive in the imagination, even now, when so many of the conditions that once surrounded these stories have changed? Part of the answer is simple. The image is unforgettable. A person leaves for what feels like one night. They return. Years have passed. Everything else grows from that. It is a shape so clear that it hardly needs explanation, and yet so full of sorrow that it continues to open wider the longer one thinks about it. Some story ideas dazzle briefly and then fade. This one does not. It enters quietly and stays. It stays because it joins wonder to grief in exact proportion. Neither feeling cancels the other. The beauty remains beautiful. The loss remains terrible. Together they create something deeper than either could alone. That balance is rare. If the other world were only frightening, the stories would be easier to dismiss. If it were only beautiful, they would be lighter, but less enduring. What gives fairy time its power is the union of attraction and consequence. The listener feels why the traveller followed the music. The listener also feels the full pain of what that music cost. The heart is pulled in both directions at once. That tension is one reason the motif never grows thin. Another reason is that it gives form to a fear that belongs to nearly every human life. The fear of lateness. Not simply the lateness of clocks, but the deeper lateness of existence. To come back when the moment has passed. To realise that what one meant to protect is already gone. To discover the world once near has moved beyond reach. This fear does not belong only to folklore. It belongs to memory, to grief, to age, to history, to ordinary love. People know what it is to miss the hour that mattered. They know what it is to return inwardly to a time that no longer exists outwardly. Fairy time makes that knowledge visible, and because it does, the old stories continue to feel painfully modern in their emotional truth. The motif also endures because it speaks to how human beings experience time unevenly. Not all years feel the same. Some periods pass in labour and repetition, each day marked and counted. Other periods vanish almost before they are understood. A season of joy can seem brief. A season of sorrow can seem endless. Memory compresses and expands life in ways that no clock fully explains. Fairy time turns this strange elasticity of experience into narrative. The traveller's inward time and the world's outward time no longer match. That mismatch is supernatural in the tale, but deeply familiar in feeling. It tells us something we already half know. That time is not only measured, it is lived. And what is lived can feel altogether different from what is counted. There is also the enduring power of landscape in this motif. Fairy time is not attached to empty abstraction. It is tied to hills, mounds, roads, waters, shores, mists, and twilight. These are places and conditions that still retain their force. Even now, a hill at dusk can seem older than the day around it. A lone road under evening sky can feel suspended outside ordinary movement. Water still changes how the world looks. Mist still blurs distance. Silence still unsettles. The natural world continues to offer moments in which the visible feels incomplete. Because of that, the old folklore never becomes wholly remote. Its settings remain available to experience, even if one no longer names that experience in the old way. This matters greatly. The stories do not survive only in books or memory. They survive because the world still sometimes feels as though it could contain them. A person may no longer speak openly of the other world, yet still feel that certain places carry a different depth. They may not believe that years will be lost beneath a hill, yet still sense that the land keeps meanings older than the present hour. fairy time endures partly because it grows from this durable feeling that the world is more layered than it first appears, and then there is beauty. The motif would not last so strongly if it were only bleak. It remains haunting because the other world is lovely. Music in the dark, light where no house should stand, a hall of peace beyond age, a green land beyond grief. Even now, people feel the pull of such images, not because they are childish fantasies, but because they answer real human longing, the desire to step outside burden, to rest in beauty, to escape the abrasions of time. These are not old desires only, they remain. And so the warning remains as well. What promises release from time may also take away what time had made dear. This gives the motif a tenderness that prevents it from becoming merely moralistic. It does not scold the traveller for longing. It understands longing. It knows why beauty is followed. That understanding gives the stories their mercy. They mourn the returner not because they were wicked, but because they were human enough to want delight, rest, and wonder. That sympathy is one reason the tales continue to console even as they trouble. They say, in effect, yes, the heart is vulnerable to beauty. Yes, memory can hold us in another hour. Yes, we can become estranged from our own lives by longing too deeply for what lies elsewhere. And yes, the sorrow that follows is real. To be told this through story is sometimes easier than to be told directly. Story can hold what plain speech cannot. Fairy time also remains powerful because it brings together individual sorrow and larger historical feeling. In a land shaped by layers of memory, conquest, loss, endurance, and cultural change, the image of returning to a world altered beyond recognition carries more than private meaning. It can suggest the passing of eras, the disappearance of old ways, the feeling that a remembered world survives only in tale and song. Oisin. Returning to an island no longer his own is one expression of this. But the pattern runs deeper than one hero. Fairy time becomes a way of imagining what it means for a whole order of life to slip into the past while still remaining emotionally near. That is one reason such stories feel ancient and immediate at once. They preserve not only myth, but the ache of historical distance. And yet, for all this breadth of meaning, the motif never loses its intimate centre. A home once known, a road once walked, a voice one hoped to hear again, a return that comes too late. This intimacy is the final source of its power. The scale may be cosmic, cultural, or spiritual, but the wound is felt in the household, in the threshold, in the changed field, in the empty place at the hearth. Time becomes vast in these stories, but grief remains local, it remains personal. That is why the listener feels it so strongly. The old tales know that sorrow enters through particulars, not abstractly. But through the one name no one answers, the one room no longer standing, the one world the heart still carries after the years have gone, there is finally a kind of wisdom in the enduring unease of fairy time. It reminds us that wonder and caution belong together, that not everything beautiful is ours to keep, that some thresholds ask for reverence rather than possession, that time, however painful, is also the medium in which love, duty, memory, and belonging become real. These stories do not ask us to despise beauty. They ask us to understand its cost when it tempts us away from mortal life altogether. In that sense, fairy time is not only a tale of enchantment, it is a tale of proportion. How long to stay, when to turn back, what to admire without entering, what to love without surrendering one's whole life to it. Those are difficult lessons, and perhaps they can never be learned once and for all. That may be why the stories must be told again. Each telling restores the balance for a little while. Each returner reminds us of the hour. Each hill, path, and hidden music warns us that the world is layered, and that not every invitation leads safely home. So when the idea still troubles us, it is not because we believe too simply in fairies. It is because we recognise ourselves in the traveller. We know the pull of wonder. We know the softness of delay. We know what it is to think there is still time. And we know, or fear, what it is to discover that time has moved more swiftly than the heart believed. That is why one night becoming many years still haunts the imagination. It speaks to something no age has escaped, the beauty of what lies beyond us, the sorrow of what passes while we're looking at it, and the hope, always fragile, that we may yet return before the world we love has changed too far. Now, with that last understanding resting quietly beside all the others, only one gentle movement remains. We have traced the threshold, the invitation, the enchantment, the return, the grief, the warning, and the meaning. What is left is not another argument, but a soft return to the image with which everything began. One night, one crossing, many years gone. And so, from this final reflection, we can pass into the closing hush of the tale, where the old Irish imagination leaves us not with certainty, but with twilight, distance, and the lingering knowledge that time was never entirely safe in the places where the fairies were said to dwell.